Ever heard about the Dogman? Maybe the next 3 encounters can refresh your memory. I've lived in the same house for 11 years. 2-story, 3 bedrooms, a yard that backs directly up to a strip of old-growth forest running along the rear of the entire development. Most of my neighbors treat that tree line the way you treat a pleasant view, something to glance at on nice mornings, a reason to feel lucky about the lot. I used to feel the same way. I don't look at that tree line the same way anymore. This started in November. The kind of November this part of Ohio gets. Gray, wet, dark by 4 in the afternoon. A persistent low drizzle that soaks into everything and refuses to stop for weeks. The kind of weather that makes the house feel like the only warm thing left in the world. My wife and I had been in the house long enough that November didn't bother us. We liked the closed-in feeling of it. We don't anymore. My dog stopped going near the back fence in the first week of that month. She's a 6-year-old lab mix, calm, not reactive, never been a nervous animal. She'd always done her perimeter check along the fence line every morning and evening without fail. That November, she started stopping at the midpoint of the yard, standing there facing the fence with her tail dropped and her ears flat, and then turning around and coming back to the porch. Every single time. The same invisible line she would not cross under any circumstance. I walked the fence line myself. The ground was soft from the rain. I found deer tracks, raccoon, what looked like a large dog. Nothing that explained her behavior. I told myself it was a coyote den somewhere in the tree line. Something she could smell that I couldn't. Then at night I started hearing things. Not loud. I wouldn't have caught it over the rain if I hadn't already been lying awake. The sound of something large moving slowly through wet leaves just beyond the fence. And underneath that, on certain nights, a low sound I couldn't clearly categorize. Not a growl, not breathing exactly. Something occupying the register below what I could identify cleanly. It was present on and off for 2 weeks before I saw anything. 2 weeks of lying awake telling myself it was deer, a large buck, something that belonged in those trees and had every right to be there. The night I saw it was a Thursday in mid-November. My wife was asleep. The kids were asleep. I was in the kitchen at just after 2 in the morning getting water because sleep had given up on me entirely. Rain on the windows. The house quiet. The motion sensor light on the back of the garage clicked on. I looked out the kitchen window. Something was standing at my back fence. The first thing I registered was size. Whatever was there was large in a way that reorganized the scale of everything around it. The fence posts suddenly looking small, the trees behind it closer than they should have been, the yard itself seeming reduced. It was standing at the fence line on 2 legs at its full height, which I estimated at somewhere between 7 and 8 feet based on its position relative to the fence panels I'd installed myself and knew the exact height of. Upright. Fully upright. On 2 legs. It had the shape of a body. Broad shoulders, a wide torso, arms hanging at its sides, 2 legs planted in the wet grass at the tree line's edge. Everything in the right arrangement for a human silhouette from a distance. But the head was wrong in a way that reached me physically before it reached me intellectually. The elongated muzzle. The ears set high on the skull rather than at the sides. The profile of something canine on something that was otherwise built like a very large man. And the fur, wet and matted from the rain, darker in patches where the wet had pressed it flat against the muscle underneath. It was facing the house, facing the window. The motion sensor light fell across it from the side, and its eyes caught the light and threw it back. Not the flat reflection of human eyes in the dark, but the amber tapetum reflection of a predator's eyes. The kind of eye shine that belongs in the tree line, and not on something standing upright on 2 legs in my backyard. I did not move. Neither did it. The motion sensor has a 2-minute timer. I know this because I installed the sensor the previous spring and set the timer myself. For the full 2 minutes that the light stayed on, I stood at the kitchen window, and it stood at my fence, and we looked at each other across 40 feet of wet, dark yard. Then the light clicked off, and the backyard went dark, and I couldn't see it against the tree line anymore. I stayed at the window. I don't know for how long. The rain kept going, and at some point I became aware that the low sound I'd been hearing for 2 weeks was present again. Close, just beyond the fence, slow and rhythmic. The sound something very large makes when it is simply breathing in the dark. Not trying to be quiet about it, not trying to be anything, just there. Then it stopped. One breath, and then nothing. Only the rain. I didn't tell my wife in the morning. I said I'd heard something in the backyard and it was probably a deer. The morning happened the way mornings happen. Kids, breakfast, school, work. And for a few hours I let the daylight do what daylight does to the things you saw at 2 in the morning. Then I walked the fence line. The ground at the tree line's edge was torn up in a way that deer hooves don't produce. Bipedal impressions in the soft, wet earth. Large, spaced in a pattern that suggested something standing still for a long time, and then walking, and then standing at the fence, and then turning and going back into the trees. I followed the return tracks about 20 feet into the undergrowth before I stopped, and decided that 20 feet was enough. The impressions were deep. Whatever had stood at my fence was very heavy. I talked to my neighbor later that week. She'd lived in the development for 20 years, grew up in that part of Ohio, knows the local history without looking it up. I described what I'd seen carefully, watching her face. She didn't look surprised. She told me there had been reports along that tree line going back to the 90s, hunters mostly, and a few residents. The general understanding, passed along informally in the way communities pass along things they'd rather not examine directly, was to keep the rear-facing lights off after midnight. That whatever came out of those woods at night was drawn to light and to being watched. I asked her what she thought it was. She said she'd grown up with a name for it, a name her grandfather had used. Then she said the name didn't matter much. What mattered was not letting it know you'd seen it. I replaced the motion sensor that weekend. The new one covers the sides of the house and the driveway, not the back. My dog still won't cross the midpoint of the yard. I've stopped getting water from the kitchen at night. I want to start with the geography because it matters. My neighborhood is the kind of suburb that looks completely ordinary from the main road. Identical houses on a curved street, shared driveways, everyone's recycling bins out on the same morning. But the street backs up to a state forest on 3 sides, the lots deep and narrow. The tree line close enough that on gray days in winter, you can smell the wet pine from the front porch. It's one of those neighborhoods where the suburb and the wilderness haven't fully decided which one owns the land. I've always liked that about it. That ambiguity has cost me something I don't think I'm getting back. This was a Wednesday in February. I'd been working late, the kind of late where you're the last car in the lot and the building security checks your floor before they leave. I left around 11:30, drove the 40 minutes home through steady rain, the kind of cold February rain that isn't quite freezing, but makes every surface slick and gray. The street was dark and quiet when I turned onto it. Porch lights on a few houses, everyone else in for the night. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, reached for my bag. The headlights stayed on for the 30-second timer before they went out. In those 30 seconds, I saw it. It was standing at the far end of the driveway near the side of the house, where the driveway runs alongside the garage and opens into the side yard before the backyard fence and the tree line begin. Standing fully upright, side on to the car, caught in the full beam of my headlights. 7.5 feet, maybe 8. Broad across the shoulders in a way that seemed wrong against the narrow passage between the garage wall and the side fence. It had its head turned toward the car. The muzzle was the first specific thing I could name. Long and tapered, the ears above it tall and pointed. The whole head carried on a neck that was too thick and too short for a human body, but correct for the thing that head belonged to. The rest of it was a body, arms, torso, two legs planted wide in the wet concrete of the driveway, the fur across its back and shoulders flattened and darkened by the rain. It was standing in my driveway in the rain at 11:30 at night, and it was between me and my front door. The headlights went out. I did not get out of the car. I want to be precise about what happened in the next 20 minutes because the detail matters. I sat in the car in the dark with the engine off and my keys in my hand, and I did not move. The car had gone dark and I could no longer see what was at the end of the driveway. I could not see my front door. I could not see the side yard or the fence or the tree line. I sat in the dark listening to the rain on the roof of the car and trying to hear anything beyond it. I heard breathing, not through the car, through the window on the driver's side, close enough to register above the rain, deep and slow. A rhythm that did not belong to anything that should have been standing on my driveway. It was close, closer than the end of the driveway where I'd seen it. It had moved while the lights were out. I turned the car back on, not to drive, just for the lights. The driveway was empty. The side yard, the fence, the tree line visible at the rear. Nothing. Whatever had been there was gone. I sat in the running car with the lights on for another 5 minutes before I trusted the driveway enough to open the door. I walked to the front door in the rain with my keys out and my back to the car the entire time, and got inside and locked every lock in the house. In the morning, I checked the driveway. The rain had been heavy enough to wash most marks away, but at the point where the driveway meets the side yard, in the narrow strip of dirt along the garage wall where the concrete ends, there were impressions. 2 of them, deep, the front portion of a very large bipedal footprint, the heel washed out by the overnight rain. Large enough and shaped in a way that I photographed them and then didn't show the photographs to anyone for 2 months. My neighbor across the street knocked on my door the following Saturday. He'd heard something in his backyard Thursday night, the night after mine, and found his back gate open in the morning, latch broken from the outside, the wood of the gate frame cracked where something had pushed through it. He wanted to know if I'd noticed anything unusual. I told him I'd heard something in the driveway Wednesday night. I described the size. He looked at me for a moment, and then said he'd heard from the couple at the end of the street that their dog had been refusing to go into the backyard for the past 3 weeks. We stood on my porch in the rain, not saying what we were both thinking. He went home. I went inside. I booked a motion-activated floodlight for the driveway that afternoon and installed it the next morning, and it has never triggered in the 14 months since. Not once. Not even for a deer. I don't know if that means it stopped coming. I think it means it learned where the light covers. Margaret has lived next door to me for 16 years. She's in her late 60s, retired, the kind of neighbor who brings soup when you're sick and knows every family on the street by name. She grew up in this part of Washington State, the daughter of a logger, a woman who has spent more time in the woods adjacent to our neighborhood than the rest of the street combined. She does not frighten easily. I say this because I need you to understand what it meant when she knocked on my door at 8 in the morning, soaking wet from the rain, and told me she'd seen something in her backyard the night before that she couldn't explain. I had never seen Margaret frightened. In 16 years, I had seen her calm in situations that would have undone most people. Standing on my front porch in the February rain, she looked like a different person than the one I'd known for a decade and a half. I brought her inside and made coffee, and she told me what she'd seen. She'd been awake at 2 in the morning, she said. Something had woken her, a sound from the backyard, not loud but wrong in a way that she'd registered immediately. She'd looked out the back bedroom window. Her yard backs to the same forest mine does, a belt of old Douglas fir that runs behind the full block of houses on our side of the street. She said something was walking along the far fence line at the edge of the tree line, walking upright, slowly, not rushing, moving from the left side of her yard to the right, the way a person walks a fence line when they're examining something. But it wasn't a person. She said she knew that before she'd taken in any specific detail. She'd grown up near these woods, and she knew the shapes that belonged near them, and the shapes that didn't, and this shape didn't. Too tall, she said. The shoulders too wide and too far from the ground. The head wrong. She watched it walk the fence line until it reached the right side of her yard, where the fence meets the side fence, and it stopped there and turned and looked at her window. She stepped back from the glass before it could see her, or before she had to see its face clearly. She stayed away from the window until daylight. I walked her yard with her that morning in the rain. At the tree line's edge, in the soft, wet earth, there were tracks. Bipedal, large, evenly spaced, running the length of her back fence. At the point where she'd said it stopped and turned, the impressions were deeper. The weight shift of something that had been moving, and then planted itself and stood still. They were the clearest tracks I've ever seen, and I photographed every one of them. I did not sleep well that night. At just after 3 in the morning, I was at my own back bedroom window. I don't know what I was expecting. Reassurance, I think. The familiar dark rectangle of my backyard, the fence, the tree line, the ordinary nothing that's usually there. Something to take the edge off Margaret's face over coffee that morning. It was standing at the center of my back fence, not moving, not pacing, standing at the fence facing the house at full height, 7 or 8 feet of it, the wet fur across its shoulders and back catching the faint ambient light from the neighborhood behind me. The canine head, the ears, the muzzle tilted slightly upward in my direction, the amber reflection of its eyes in the dark, 2 fixed points of pale light aimed at the window where I was standing. It was raining steadily and neither of us moved for a long time. I have tried many times since to account for the sensation I had looking at it across my dark backyard. It wasn't purely fear. I've been afraid before and I know what that feels like. It was something more specific. The sensation of being recognized, of looking at something that had looked at this house many times before and knew who stood at this window and was entirely comfortable with the knowledge. I was the new information in the equation. It had been here long enough that it was not. It turned eventually and walked back into the tree line. Not startled, not rushing. Finished, the way a person leaves a place when they've seen enough. In the morning, I told Margaret what I'd seen and showed her the photographs from her yard. She looked at them for a long time. Then she called her son, who lives 2 hours away, and told him she was going to stay with him for a while. I didn't call anyone. I've lived in this house for 16 years and I'm not leaving it. But I've had conversations with 3 other residents on the block since then. 2 of them had heard things near the back fence at night. One of them had seen something she'd refused to describe beyond saying it was large, and it stood up straight, and she had never seen any animal move the way it moved. She said she'd lived on this street for 9 years and nothing like it had happened before this winter. I've been thinking about that, about why this winter specifically, about what changed in those woods or what came to them, or what finally decided that the tree line was close enough to the houses to close the remaining distance. I don't have an answer. I just don't look out the back window at 3 in the morning anymore. Margaret sold her house in March. The new family moved in last month. They have 2 young kids who play in the backyard. I haven't said anything to them yet. I'm not sure what I'd say.